still remember my mother's last look. It was a gaze filled with pain, but also with a strength I didn't understand back then. I was ripped from her arms as if I were nothing, an object to be moved from one place to another. She said something to me, whispered words, almost imperceptible, but they were etched in my soul forever. Promise me you'll survive. And in that moment, a promise was made, a promise I never told anyone. Not because I didn't want to, but because the pain of keeping it every single day was something only I understood. It was a promise made amidst the chaos of separation, violence, and a life without choices. I didn't know that what my mother meant with those words would follow me throughout my life. Today, after all these years, it's what keeps me alive. And if you're willing to listen, I'll tell you everything from the beginning. Since I can remember, what marked my day the most wasn't the hours, nor the weather, nor even the sounds around me. What marked me was fear, a deep fear that ran through every fiber of my body. The fear of being seen, the fear of being found, the fear of punishment, the fear of being separated from those I loved. I was a child. I barely knew what the future meant. But as I grew older, I felt a different weight on my shoulders. I knew there was something behind all of that, something I couldn't understand. My eyes, still innocent, saw the suffering of those around me. But the most agonizing thing was seeing my mother's suffering. She never spoke much about what she felt. To me, she was a fortress, a woman with an immeasurable strength. She worked tirelessly, always with a smile, even when life gave no reason to smile. Every gesture of hers seemed to carry a purpose, a protection, something only a mother could offer. She, with her callous hands from forced labor, but with a huge heart, always tried to teach me the value of the small things. How the food we had, even though it was scarce, should be appreciated and shared. How a look full of affection could be more valuable than any material wealth. She taught me to value what was simple and true. We didn't have freedom. We didn't have rights. We didn't have choices. But she gave me something no one could take, love. A love that was our only protection amidst so much violence. Our only resistance against a system that dehumanized us. But at the same time, that love made me vulnerable. I lived with the constant fear that, at any moment, we could be separated. I don't know how to explain it, but that feeling of loss, that premonition that one day she could be taken from me, always followed me. I tried not to show the fear, but it was there, like a shadow that never left me. The days passed, and over time, life seemed to follow the same course as always. The exhausting work, the shouts of the masters, the punishments. But my mother was always there, looking at me, guiding me. Her eyes were deep, full of wisdom and sadness. She taught me to survive, to resist. She knew that, at some point, our separation would come, but she didn't want me to know that. I, for my part, just wanted to believe that nothing could separate us. But deep down, I knew that was an illusion that wouldn't last forever. Our destinies were sealed in a way we didn't understand, but that, in some way, was already written. The hardest thing for her was probably realizing that there was nothing she could do to prevent it. But she never showed weakness, never made me feel that something was wrong. Deep down, she surrendered to her pain in a silent way, as if she wanted to protect me from something she couldn't change. She tried to be strong until the last moment, and me, I saw her as the bravest woman in the world. Even when life's cruelty tried to rip away everything that remained of her dignity, she didn't give up. Her voice never ceased to be firm, and her gaze, though sad, never lost hope even through it all. She looked at me with a love that was the only thing that truly mattered to me. It was what gave me strength to face the darkest days. But the truth is, I didn't know what it meant to truly be free. I only had the feeling that there was something beyond those invisible fences that bound us, something that, although I didn't know what it was, gave me hope. I grew up with that inside me, but I didn't know how to explain it, nor how to fight against it. The most painful thing was realizing, as the years passed, that our life, even with so much love, wasn't ours. It was being determined by other hands, by a cruel system that had no mercy for those who were human. And over time, I began to understand that, more than anything, my mother wanted me to survive. She knew the pain of separation was coming, but the greatest pain for her would be seeing me being broken by life, without a chance of resistance. She wanted me to be strong, not just to resist, but to understand that, even in slavery, there was something no one could take from us: our dignity. My separation from my mother was something I could never fully process. When I was torn from her side, the emptiness inside me was unbearable. I still felt the warmth of her embrace, but it was gone as quickly as a breeze. When I looked back for the last time, I saw her gaze. I don't know how to describe that look, but it's carved in my soul. She was telling me something I couldn't understand yet, but it would guide me throughout my life. Deep down, I knew that was the farewell, and yet I still had hope. Maybe it was an illusion, but something in my chest still believed that one day we would reunite. One day, she and I would be together again, away from all that pain. To then know I would never see her again. But this hope, this small fragment of faith, was what kept me standing. In the years that followed, this hope was what made me carry on, what gave me the strength to resist everything that was to come. And to this day, whenever I remember her, it's that look that comes to my mind, the look of a mother who knew the worst was coming, but who wanted, above all, for me to survive, so that one day I could tell this story. The moment I was torn away from my mother, the world felt like it had fallen apart. I remember the cold hands that gripped me, dragging me away from her, and the sound of her voice calling my name one last time. That was the moment everything changed. I didn't know it then, but it was the moment I lost everything. For years, I carried the weight of that moment, that separation, as though it was a burden that no one else could understand. My heart ached in ways I never thought possible. The feeling of being ripped away from the one person who had always been there for me, who had protected me with every ounce of her being, was more than I could bear. I was just a child, lost in a world that didn't care, a world that would never be kind. I wanted to scream, to fight, to run back to her, but I was just too small, too weak. My legs wouldn't move, my body refused to react. All I could do was stare at the distance between us, feeling the gaping hole in my chest grow wider with each passing second. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and pain. I was thrown into a new world, a world that was cold and unfamiliar. I didn't understand what was happening to me, or why. The others around me, those who had been through this same torment before, had already learned to adapt. They had learned how to survive, how to endure, how to keep their heads down and stay out of the way. I, however, was still a child, still naive in so many ways. I didn't know the rules of this new life. I didn't know how to hide the fear that churned in my stomach every time I saw one of the overseers. I didn't know how to keep the tears from falling when I thought about my mother, about the promise she had made me keep. It was like a weight I couldn't escape, a burden I couldn't set down. At first, I thought I would never see her again. That thought haunted me every day, every night. But somehow, I held onto a flicker of hope, even though it seemed foolish. I thought that maybe, just maybe, she would come for me. Maybe she would fight for me. But as the days passed, and I saw the cruelty of the world around me. That hope began to die. My mother wasn't coming. She wasn't going to save me. The thought settled in like a stone in my chest, and as much as it hurt, I knew that I had to survive. For her, for the promise I had made. I couldn't let her sacrifice be in vain. I had to be strong, even if that strength was just a thin thread that seemed ready to snap at any moment. But I couldn't let go of it. I couldn't let go of her. Love. I held onto that love like a lifeline, even though it hurt to do so. Every day felt like a battle to stay alive, a battle to keep my dignity, a battle to hold onto the memory of my mother. And slowly, over time, I began to change. The boy who had been torn from his mother became someone else. He had to. The world didn't care about the child in me, the one who still dreamed of a life free from chains. The world only cared about the survivor, and so I became a survivor. But that didn't mean I forgot. That didn't mean I stopped missing her. That didn't mean I stopped wishing every single day that I could somehow go back to the time before everything changed. But time doesn't allow for such things, and so I kept going. I didn't have a choice. There were days when I would lie awake at night, staring up at the dark sky, and I would think of her. I would remember her voice, her touch, the way she used to hold me close when I was scared. I could still feel the warmth of her embrace in my bones, even though she was no longer there. I could still hear her words in my head, urging me to survive. It wasn't enough to simply exist. She wanted me to live and to honor her memory. And so, I did what I had to do. I fought, I endured, I kept my head down and my heart hidden. But the promise I made to her was always with me. It never left me. And in those moments when I felt like I couldn't go on, when I felt like the weight of the world was too much to bear, it was that promise that kept me going. It was that promise that reminded me that no matter what happened, I could never forget where I came from. I could never forget who I was. And I could never forget the love that my mother had given me, even in the darkest moments. That love was my light. It was the one thing no one could take from me. I didn't know where life would take me or how it would end, but I knew that as long as I lived, I would carry my mother's love with me. It would guide me, it would sustain me, and it would remind me that no matter what happened, I was not alone. And that was enough. For a long time, I didn't speak of her. I didn't speak of the pain, of the promise, of the hope that it was something I carried silently, like a weight I wasn't sure I could share with anyone. But as the years passed, and I saw the faces of others who had experienced the same pain, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one who carried this burden. Maybe, in some way, we all carried it. We all carried the memory of those we had lost. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to bring us together, to make us stronger, to make us survivors. As the years passed, something in me began to change. I wasn't the same boy who had been ripped from his mother's arms anymore. The world around me had forged a new version of myself. It wasn't the world I had dreamed of, one where I was free to run, to laugh, to live without fear. No, this world was one of survival. Every day became a battle, not just against the forces that tried to break me, but against my own soul. There were moments, brief flashes of light, where I would catch myself remembering who I was before the chains. I remembered a boy who loved to run through the fields, who had a mother who protected him from everything. But those moments were rare, and when they came, they felt like a cruel reminder of something I could never return to. I quickly learned how to keep my head down, to avoid the attention of the overseers, to never show weakness, to never let anyone see the fear in my eyes. Every day, I told myself that I was stronger than the world that wanted to break me. But deep inside, I was still that child, lost and desperate for his mother. The pain of being torn from her never fully left. It haunted me in my sleep, in my waking hours, in every moment of silence. The work was relentless, the exhaustion was suffocating, but more than that, it was the emotional toll that crushed me. I could feel the spirit of so many around me being slowly drained, day by day, until they were nothing but empty shells. I saw the elders, those who had been broken by this system for years, their eyes vacant, their souls lost to the past. They had nothing left to give, except their labor, and even that was taken from them without a thought. And I feared that one day, that would be me, that I would lose my sense of self, that the memory of my mother would fade, that I would forget the promise I made to her. But even in the darkest times, a part of me refused to die. That small spark of hope, however faint, still clung to my heart. I remembered her words, "Promise me you'll survive." And I knew, deep down, that I had to honor that promise, no matter how hard it became, no matter how broken I felt. I had to survive, for her, for the life that had been stolen from us, for the love that no one could take away. I don't know how I did it. I don't know how I kept going. There were days when I thought I couldn't take another step. Days when I wondered if it would be easier to simply give up. But I never did, because in the quiet moments, when the world was at its most brutal, I heard her voice in my head. I felt her presence beside me. She wasn't physically there, but her spirit, her strength, was always with me, and I carried that with me every day, even when I was surrounded by pain and despair. Survival wasn't just about living, it was about remembering. It was about holding on to who we were, who we had been before the world tried to strip us of everything. And through all the pain, all the suffering, I found something within myself I hadn't expected. I found strength in my memories. I found resilience in my sorrow. I found my mother's love. Even when everything else seemed to be fading away, it wasn't easy. The years dragged on. There were moments of joy, small, fleeting moments that seemed like luxuries in the midst of so much darkness, and I learned to savor those moments, to hold on to them like they were treasures, but they were rare, like precious stones in a world of gravel. I watched people around me, people who had been born into this life, people who knew nothing but pain, begin to give up. I watched them break, one by one, and every time I saw someone fall, I felt a part of me fall with them. I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't allow myself to become just another broken soul in the sea of misery. But it was hard. It was harder than I ever imagined, and still, I kept my promise. But sometimes, it gets so hard to carry these memories. It gets so heavy. Sometimes, I just need to hear someone else say they're carrying this weight too. So, if you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, I just have to ask, would you mind subscribing? I'm telling this story for a reason, and if you believe in it, if you believe in remembering, I just hope you'll stay with me so that we don't forget. As time wore on, I began to see things differently. The anger, the bitterness, the sadness, they were all still there, but something had shifted within me. It wasn't enough to simply survive anymore. I needed to understand why. I needed to make sense of the pain that had shaped me, of the years I had lost. The struggle to survive had transformed into something else, a deep need to know who I was, who I could be, in spite of everything that had been taken from me. In those quiet moments, when I found myself alone, I would ask myself what it all meant. Why had I been torn away from my mother? Why had we been forced to endure such suffering? What was the purpose of all the pain? And most importantly, what was I supposed to do with it all? I didn't have answers. I didn't know if anyone did. But I knew one thing. I couldn't just keep living in the shadow of my past. I had to find a way to move forward, to honor the memory of the life I once had, the life that had been stolen from me, and to give meaning to the promise I had made to my mother. I didn't know how to begin, but I started by looking around at the people I met along the way. I saw the same emptiness in their eyes that I had once felt. They, too, had lost everything: family, home, hope, and yet they had found a way to keep going. Some of them had become hardened, their hearts as cold as the chains that had bound them. Others had simply given up, their spirits broken beyond repair. But there were some who still carried a flicker of light in their eyes. They had found a way to keep their humanity, to keep their dignity, despite everything. They were the ones who inspired me, who reminded me that survival wasn't enough. It wasn't just about making it through another day. It was about finding a way to live with purpose, with hope, with the knowledge that no matter what had happened to us, we could still choose to be more than the sum of our suffering. I began to understand that I couldn't allow my pain to define me. It was a part of me, yes, it would always be a part of me, but I didn't have to let it consume me. I didn't have to let it turn me into someone I didn't want to be. Slowly, I began to change. I stopped being just a survivor. I started to be someone who was determined to rebuild, to find meaning in the pieces of myself that had been shattered. It wasn't easy. It didn't happen overnight, but with every small step, I felt something inside me begin to heal. Not completely. There were parts of me that would never be whole again, but enough to know that I could still move forward. I could still have a life, a future, even if it was different from the one I had imagined as a child. The memories of my mother, of the life I once had, would always be with me. But I realized that I could honor them in a way that was healthy, in a way that gave me strength rather than holding me back. I didn't have to stay in the past, in the pain. I could remember and keep moving forward, and so I did. Day by day, I kept building. I began to see the world differently. I started to see people differently. They weren't just survivors of the same system of oppression. They were human beings, just like me, with stories, with dreams, with pain, but also with the power to rise above it all. And that's when I realized that the promise I made to my mother wasn't just about survival. It was about resilience. It was about honoring the memory of what we had lost, but also finding the strength to move forward, to create something new out of the ashes of the past. The journey wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of it all seemed unbearable. But in those moments, I remembered her words, "Promise me you'll survive." And I knew that surviving wasn't enough. I had to live. I had to find a way to thrive, to carry the legacy of my mother forward. I couldn't let her sacrifice be for nothing. I couldn't let the pain of the past define me. And I couldn't let the world that had tried to break me win. By the time I had come to terms with the reality of my existence, the world had already shifted in ways I couldn't control. I was no longer the child who cried for his mother every night, but I was still that boy. Deep inside, the memories hadn't faded. They never do. I began to learn how to navigate this new life, to survive not just the physical torment, but the mental one as well. The weight of the past never left me, but I had learned to carry it, to keep it close as a reminder of where I had come from. In a way, it had become a part of me, woven into the fabric of who I was, a constant presence, but not one that could destroy me anymore. At least, that's what I told myself. I thought about my mother often, about the promise I made her. I had survived, but in surviving, I had become something else. I wasn't sure what that was yet, but I knew I was no longer the same person I had been When I was torn from her arms, there was no going back. But in some strange way, I didn't want to go back. The boy I had been was lost in the winds of time, replaced by someone forced by hardship, by pain, and by resilience. I didn't know if it was for better or worse, but it was who I had become. I had learned to live with my scars, both the visible and the invisible ones, the kind that no one can see but you, the ones that shape you into someone who doesn't know how to feel whole anymore, but knows how to survive. And yet, as the years passed, I began to understand something I hadn't before. Survival, in its rawest form, isn't enough. It's not enough to simply wake up every day, to exist in a world that has broken you. I had survived, yes, but I had lost so much along the way, more than I ever thought possible. My childhood, my innocence, my sense of belonging, all of it had been stolen, piece by piece. And no matter how much I tried to fill the void, no matter how much I pushed myself to move forward, I could still feel that emptiness inside. I felt it every day, lurking just beneath the surface, like a shadow that never left. It wasn't until I met others who had been through the same hell, others who had lost just as much, that I began to understand the depth of my own loss. They, too, carried the same emptiness. We all had our own ways of coping, of surviving. Some turned to silence, others to anger. Some tried to forget, while others couldn't escape the haunting memories. But no matter what, we all shared the same pain, and it was in that shared experience, in those quiet moments where we didn't need to speak, that I realized something important. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were trying to heal. I don't know when it happened exactly, when that shift began to take place, but slowly, over time, I started to see the possibility of something else. I started to see the possibility of healing. It wasn't going to happen overnight, and it wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. It was a glimmer of hope in a world that had tried so hard to steal our hope. And with that glimmer, I began to believe again in myself, in the power of the human spirit. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't undo what had been done to me, but I could change what I became, how I carried the weight of that past, and how I moved forward. I could choose to heal, to let go of the bitterness and anger that had consumed me for so long. I could choose to honor my mother's memory, not by living in the past, but by moving forward, by finding a way to be whole again, even if it meant finding wholeness in a broken world. The road to healing wasn't easy, but I had learned one thing: nothing worth having ever is. And so, I kept going. Every step, no matter how small, was a step toward healing. Every day, I moved further away from the pain, even though I knew it would always be a part of me. I carried it, but I didn't let it control me anymore. The past would always be there, but I could choose to let the future be something different. I could choose to make it better, to create something new, to build a life, piece by piece, out of the ashes of the past. And as I did, I began to understand something that had once been so elusive. Survival is not just about holding on. It's about finding the strength to let go of the things that keep us trapped. It's about finding a way to breathe again, to live again, to move forward, even when the weight of everything we've lost feels like it's too much to bear. And for the first time in so long, I felt a sense of peace, not because everything was perfect, not because I was whole, but because I had finally realized that healing wasn't about becoming who I had been. It was about becoming who I could be. By the time I reached what I now consider a turning point in my life, I had already lost so much. I had lost my childhood, my innocence, my connection to the world that others seemed to walk through so freely. But what I didn't realize, not until much later, was that in losing all of that, I had gained something else. I had gained a sense of understanding that others couldn't comprehend. I had seen the darkness of the world up close, felt its cruelty in my bones, and survived it. But there was still a part of me that clung to the hope that there was something more than this life, something more than just surviving, more than just existing. I couldn't let go of the idea that I was meant for something greater than the life I had been given. So, I kept pushing forward, even when the road was rough, even when it seemed like nothing would ever change. The years had a way of wearing you down, of making you forget who you once were, of making you believe that this was all there was to life, that the world had no room for someone like me. But I refused to believe that. I wasn't sure what I was searching for, but I knew that I couldn't keep living the way I had been. There had to be more. There had to be a reason for all the suffering, all the pain I had endured. I had to believe that somehow it was all leading me to something better, and so I began to change. It wasn't a sudden shift, no grand moment of realization. It was more like a slow, gradual awakening, as if the layers of despair and sorrow were being peeled away, revealing something underneath that I had almost forgotten. I started to see the world around me differently. It wasn't just a place full of cruelty and injustice anymore. It was a place full of possibility, a place where survival didn't have to be the only goal. I began to see people differently. Too, they weren't just victims of the same system of oppression I had been trapped in. They were people with stories, with dreams, with the potential to rise above the suffering they had known. They, too, had been broken by the same hands that had broken me. But somehow, they had found a way to keep going. They had found a way to heal. And I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was a way for me to do the same. The healing wasn't easy. It never is. But it was a process, a slow and steady journey towards something better. Something that had been buried deep inside me for so long. I started to feel a sense of peace that I hadn't known before. A peace that came from within, from knowing that I was no longer just a survivor. I was someone who was choosing to live, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't defined by my past anymore. I wasn't defined by the pain I had carried for so long. I had made it through, yes, but now I was choosing to live, to truly live. And with that choice came a sense of freedom that I had never known. A freedom not from the chains that had once bound me, but from the invisible chains that had kept me prisoner to my own grief and anger. I had learned to forgive, not just the people who had wronged me, but myself. I had carried the weight of my own mistakes for so long, but I realized that I couldn't move forward until I let go of the guilt and shame that had been holding me back. I had to forgive myself for not being able to protect my mother, for not being able to stop the pain. But forgiveness didn't come easily. It never does. It was a battle, one I had to fight with every part of me, but I fought it. And slowly, piece by piece, the weight lifted, and as it lifted, I began to see clearly for the first time in years. I could see the road ahead of me, and for the first time, I could see the possibility of something better. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quick, but I knew that I had come this far. I had survived everything that life had thrown at me, and now, I was choosing to thrive, choosing to live. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew that I had the strength to face it. I had the strength to move forward, to keep going, to keep fighting for something better. And that was all I needed. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It wasn't about pretending that it hadn't happened. It was about learning from it, growing from it, and using it to fuel the person I was becoming. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was becoming someone worth being. As I look back on all that I've lived, I realize how much of it is still with me. the pain, the fear, the loss. It's all a part of me, a part of my story. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand it. I don't know if I'll ever be able to make sense of why things happened the way they did. But I do know this. It made me who I am today. And I don't think I would change that. In the beginning, I thought that the only thing that mattered was survival. I thought that if I could just make it through, if I could just keep breathing, that would be enough. But as time passed, I learned that survival isn't enough. It never is. It's not enough to just exist in a world that's broken. I had to find a way to live, to find meaning in all the pain. And in that search, I found something more. I found strength in my memories, strength in the love that my mother gave me, strength in the hope that one day I would be free from the chains that bound me, chains that not only held my body captive, but my spirit as well. And even though I'm free now, even though the chains are gone, the weight of it all still lingers. It lingers in the way I look at the world, in the way I see people, in the way I carry my past with me. Always, I've learned to carry it too. Let it shape me into someone stronger, someone who knows the true meaning of survival. But there are days when the weight feels like too much. There are days when the memories resurface and the pain threatens to overwhelm me. And on those days, I remember my mother's words, "Promise me you'll survive." I know now that survival wasn't just about enduring. It was about living with purpose. It was about learning how to find peace, how to let go of the anger, how to forgive and move forward. It was about finding a way to be whole again, even though I'll never be the same. And as I share my story, I do it not for me, but for all of us. For the ones who have been broken, for the ones who have suffered, for the ones who still carry the weight of a past they can't escape. I tell this story because I want you to know that you're not alone. We are not alone. We may be separated by time, by distance, by circumstances, but we are all connected by the pain, the love, the resilience that we share. And I want you to remember that no matter where you are in your journey, no matter how heavy the weight may seem, you have the strength to carry on. You have the strength to heal, to rebuild, to rise above everything that has tried to break you. And if you're still here, if you've listened to my story all the way through, then maybe it's time to start your own journey of healing. Maybe it's time to start finding your own peace, your own purpose. I've carried this story for so long. Now, it's time for you to carry it with me. And if you feel moved, if you understand the weight of these words, I ask you to stay with me. Subscribe and join me in this journey. Let's not forget what we've lived. Let's not forget what we can become.